I'm going to do some work on a Fender acoustic guitar. This is an affordable workhorse that is well loved, and it's got a few little issues that need taken care of. When we think about the history of Fender acoustics, it always seems to be a bit of an afterthought to me. Like, they were such a dominant force in the evolution of electrics, but the acoustics, they seem to be there just to take up space in the market. As if someone in a board meeting said, well, you know, we should probably have an acoustic too, and they said, yes, you can head that up. Not to say that they didn't try some interesting, innovative stuff at the beginning. You'll remember that Wildwood I worked on some months ago? That was genuinely wild. Those early acoustics from the 60s had that 1-inch diameter aluminum rod running from end to end inside the body, trying to stabilize things. You know, they had the bolt-on necks and the 6-on-the-side headstock. It's all very innovative, kind of novel. Eventually, by the 70s, a lot of that stuff fell away as Fender decided to move production to Japan, which is what we have here. This is an F65 from sometime in the 1970s, not exactly sure, and it's made in Japan. It's very similar to a Yamaha of a period. It's interesting to me that in terms of endorsement, it was mostly the country guys who were seen playing them. Johnny Cash made some TV appearances with one, so did Buck Owens when he wasn't playing his harmony. Charlie Pride had a Wildwood. I mean, they're not really synonymous with any of these players, but I guess someone in marketing took a crack at it. Oh, Ray Davis of the Kinks had one too. You'll often see these things listed on Reverb, mistakenly suggesting they have solid rosewood back and sides, which is another case of someone making the mistake and everyone cut and pasting it afterwards. I believe they are sequence matched veneers on the outsides of the stack, but they are laminated. This one actually has a laminated top as well, although it's a good looking piece of veneer. Faux plastic abalone binding. The thing is, the fit and finish on these guitars is really good, like a lot of the Yamaha-esque guitars are, and had they been made with solid materials back then, ooh, they'd go for a lot of money today, but they didn't, so they don't. This one presented some months ago when the owner brought me another guitar to fix. I had a look at it then. The action was quite low. It was like shredder guitar low. It's since risen slightly, I think. But there are some other issues. Seems like there's some back braces that are loose. And there's evidence of the top collapsing slightly in front of the bridge. So we have to have a look in there and see what's going on. The action is 5/64 on the bass side, which is fine. Less than 3 on the treble, which is too low. I would never normally set up one of these at that height. I've seen people online suggest that there's no reason your acoustic can't have the exact same action as your shredder guitar. And that's true, except for the fact that you can't expect it to stay there for very long. Because acoustic bodies are much more subject to change due to humidity. So 3/64 today could be very nice and playable. In January, it could be down to 2 and buzzing everywhere. So a balance is struck. They're a little higher than electrics, just to take that into account. It's not such an issue with these guitars because they have Gibson-esque adjustable saddles on them. It's not too hard for the player to adjust, assuming they have a table knife of the appropriate size. In this case, we also have a crack that's running between all of the bridge pin holes. This often happens if the pegs were a little bit too tight and the guitar dried out. In that case, the pins act like a little wedge, it splits it like firewood. Now this can be worrisome if the crack extends out beyond the outside pinholes. I'm comfortable filling and fixing this one, but if it was cracking out into the wings, I'd pull it off and replace it. And then again, we're into that gray area. How much do you spend on something like this? Maybe the question is, how do you find someone who has the skill to do these repairs and is willing to do them on a plywood guitar? Because I'm going to be honest, it's not particularly exciting to a lot of people in the business. A lot of repair people will just turn this away without looking at it most of the time, based on the description. And that includes me. You know, I can't save every campfire special out there. There are other guitars. It becomes a question of what do you want to spend your time on. Neck relief is around 8 or 9 thousandths, which is fine. I'll leave it there. Yeah, I'm going to pay attention to how these bridge pins come out. If they're really snug or if they're loose due to the crack. And they are not loose. This again is a case of a black bridge, which is not ebony. It's been dyed, which makes the repair a little bit more tricky, cosmetically speaking. Ebony bridges, the cracks virtually disappear when I'm done. You can't see them at all. But I can't really sand down too much into this surface without it turning brown, so some art is required. Bracing on the top looks good, and I probed it with a feeler gauge. It's all glued tight. The really interesting thing to see here is how the tone bars have not only been set into the X-brace, but actually pass right through it. You can see the ends visible on the other side. The bridge plate has a crack through its pinholes as well. In an expensive guitar, I might try and wrestle that out of there. In this case, an overlay will suffice. There are lots of dust bunnies and general grunge caked up on the back braces and in the corners there. So the first order of business is to get in there with the vacuum cleaner, get as much of that out as I possibly can, because I can't really glue back braces with so much dirt in the way. It'd be difficult to identify them, and also if you probe them with the feeler gauge, you might actually drag the dirt underneath, making a poor joint. After cleaning with a lightly dampened paper towel, I can see the culprit. There's actually only one, and it's about 1/3 the length of the brace. It's amazing how much noise and instability can come from something so small. So put some tape there on either side of the brace and then get in there with a little probe again. Stuff some glue in. I'll try and clean out the excess, and then I'll use a jack. This is a homemade version using a wing nut and a couple pieces of wood. This is the dry run to adjust the length. When I do this for real, I support the back with a long, thin, flexible, cork-backed caul clamped across the body to back up the pressure and hold the parts together. Alternately, there's this incredible and incredibly expensive scissor jack. It's a StewMac product. In some cases, way down inside, it's the thing to use. Nothing else really works as well. It's just really easy to adjust. I'm sanding a scrap of ebony to make some black dust. Filling the cracks is a multi-part process. I'll pack in some dust. Then I'll hit it with some thin viscosity super glue. I'll let that kick off, and then I'll add some more. It took about 5 layers until it reached the surface. Then I could lightly sand it, exposing more brown than I wanted. So I'm dyeing it with some black India ink, which is pretty handy for this job. When that's dry, I can come back and buff it up using a clean, dry cloth, and then apply a light coat of wax, which will give a sheen that's pretty appropriate. Here I'm measuring the distance between the outside pinholes. I'll plane up a piece of hard maple for the underlay bridge pad. Drill some holes that are the correct distance apart. I have to make sure the surfaces in there are nicely cleaned. I sand them lightly with 220 grit paper and then get in there with some naphtha. A couple of 832 machine screws are just about the right size to locate things. Get it all clamped up. You'll see the caul on the top has a kerf cut in it, so it will more easily conform to the surface of the bridge. Polishing, polishing, polishing. I'm going to apply a little bit of oil to the board. This is marketed as lemon oil, but it's really mostly mineral oil with lemon scent. The oil makes the board look pretty, and it slows down moisture transfer a little bit. Yes, you can use linseed oil, but it's not going to protect things any better, because you don't want to build a coat of oil on the surface of the board. It's too soft and it gets gunky. The linseed oil will also darken, and it gets into a strange polymerized state that is no fun to play on. So you have to wipe all the excess off anyhow. Now I have to drill holes through the bridge pad overlay. I back it up inside with a block of wood to keep the blowout to a minimum. It's better than using your bare hand. There was a lot of excess height on the nut. It was maybe 2 to 3 times deeper than it needed to be. So I filed off the excess. This is a boring and uninteresting job, but it has to be done on so many guitars. Then I cleaned up the nut slots a little bit and relieved the back edge where the string exits the nut. Softens it a little bit, makes tuning a little bit smoother. Although these actual tuners on this guitar are, well, let's just say they're kind of hit and miss. Plain old number 2 or HB pencil lead works as a really good lubricant. Well, there we go. Another back from the brink. That felt like a comfortable level of repair to get one of these back in action. Sensible, you know. This is strung with 11 to 52s, which is what the player likes. And the amount of dip in the top with those on it is actually, it's not extreme. With all the top braces glued in place, there's not much to be done. Sometimes the plywood fatigues a bit over time, but it's not in danger of falling completely apart. The action is a perfectly comfortable 5/64 on the bass, 4 on the treble. If you're a vigorous strummer, you might want a little bit higher, but 85% of the population is going to pick that up and say, ooh, that's nice. So let's play something. What does it sound like? Sounds like a lightly built Japanese plywood guitar from the 70s, which is to say it sounds fine, and maybe even a little better than that. Fender advertised these as a guitar you could take to the beach. So, you know, sophisticated sound? Probably not their intention. Straightforward, serviceable guitar? Definitely.